Good morning. This is Jeff Santos, and welcome to the Jeff Santos Show. It's our second edition. We are very excited to be on 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings right here in the East Coast and 1 p.m. in the Pacific time zone. We have a great program for you today. We'll be talking with Ben Wilkes. He is the director of the Washington office of MoveOn.org. Mark Taylor Canfield, musician, and of course a great journalist, a freelance reporter, will join us from Seattle, WA. And Bernie Porn, Michigan pollster, of course president of Epic-MRA, will get everything on Michigan. We'll of course take your emails, jeff@revolutionboston.com. Check us out and post on both Facebook and Twitter, and we'll be right back after this. Time out.
Maybe you can make retirement happen. After all, you made her college years happen. Opening that education savings account when she was little. Spearheading a campus tour. And another, and another, and another, and another. Bam! Deciphering financial aid. She was like, what? And now she's like, you aced planning for college. Now get the tips you need to get on track at aceyourretirement.org.
Meet the scan, a simple procedure whose mission is to detect lung cancer early.
I'm here to save you.
But I feel fine.
That's great, but you may still be at high risk for lung cancer.
Oh man, that's a new fence.
If you smoke, early detection could save your life. Learn more at savedbythescan.org.
Welcome back. We have been obviously monitoring, like every other news organization, what has been happening over the last few weeks in Washington. Of course, the Kavanaugh hearings were dominating the news every day. And somebody who was involved in all of that is the Washington director of MoveOn.org. Ben Wilkes joins us via Skype. Ben, I know it's been a crazy time for you as we tape this today. It's a Friday, just the end of the Kavanaugh hearings. It has been an emotional and incredibly testy time. Give us a little perspective upon what you guys have been doing, organizing a lot of marches. We did a little bit of stuff with a radio show. Give us a little background if you can.
Sure. So as soon as Kennedy retired, word went out, and a slew of organizations started getting together to work together to prevent a far-right extremist from being nominated or named to the Supreme Court. And this coalition with groups like NARAL, Planned Parenthood, Demand Justice, which is a new group that's focused on the courts, everyone from the Women's March and Center for Popular Democracy, tons of different groups got together. The night that Kavanaugh was nominated, I was outside the Supreme Court. I think NARAL spearheaded that, and Citizens United was there, and senators like Warren and, Gillibrand and tons of different senators out there. It was dark outside. We were lit by the floodlights from the TV cameras, and we were all just vowing to do everything we could to try to stop this guy. So we had our concerns about him. Before the allegations came out, actually, we organized the biggest day of action of protests in all 50 states against a Supreme Court justice nominee, the biggest day of action that had ever happened. That was August 26th.
That's
but
fantastic.
All of that was enough to move some Democrats away from it. But all that together still wasn't enough to make his nomination an open question, because the Republicans were standing by him. Now, by the time this show airs, I expect, based on everything I know right now, that he will be confirmed to the Supreme Court. He'll probably be sitting on the bench hearing cases. But we came very close. And the thing that strikes me the most about this fight is that thanks to, I think, hundreds of thousands of phone calls, possibly millions of phone calls, targeting every senator, but especially massive mobilization in Maine and Alaska and other key places, thanks to this enormous concerted effort, thanks to people protesting and marching and going into the Hart Senate office building every day here in Washington, D.C., I think that we've changed the politics of the Supreme Court of the nominating process, because this used to be an issue that turned Republicans on. They got them excited. They got them to vote for presidential candidates. They got them to fight, and not as much on the Democratic side. There was always this advantage in enthusiasm on the right. And I think this fight, I think enthusiasm is not the right word for it, but the sense of like very personal outrage and fury has shifted. And I think now there will be significant consequences for anyone who thinks about supporting a far-right judicial nominee. And I think that'll shape what happens in the next presidential election. I think that'll certainly shape what happens in the midterms this fall.
Let me ask you this, Ben, because I think a lot of people I talked to this morning, particularly younger folks, were so annoyed by the fact that if you look at the 100 people who are making the decision, 100 members of this U.S. Senate, many of them are from smaller Western states with populations under 1 million, or maybe 1 million, a couple. There is very little representation of people of color, Latino, African American, a handful of senators. One of the things that I'm wondering about is, will Move On and your coalition look at potentially the statehood issue for both D.C. and Puerto Rico? Because I look at the fact that, you have these people deciding on, the most important Supreme Court decision at the 5-4 vote now, if indeed he is confirmed. And, thousands of, millions of Americans are not being able to vote. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think that statehood for D.C. and Puerto Rico are going to be very active issues in the 2020 presidential election. And I think we're going to, certainly the Democratic contenders are going to be asked where they stand on this. And I think it's something that they're going to have to live up to. We're in a profoundly undemocratic moment. It's a moment when a minority of the country has managed to shape the rules and benefited from a set of rules that allow an undemocratic form of government. Right now, the president was elected by a minority of the public.
Right.
The Republican senators, overwhelmingly represent a much smaller part of the public. And there are millions of Americans who do not have representation in Congress because they're in Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. This Republican Senate caucus plus this Republican president who was elected with a minority vote are now putting in a Supreme Court justice who the overwhelming share of Americans roundly reject. And that's a kind of trifecta of undemocratic illegitimacy that poses a real problem. And I think it's something that we need to fight against.
So as it looks today, we're obviously taping this on Friday, a week, 10 days before broadcast. And it looks right now that the deciding votes will have been Mr. Flake in Arizona, potentially Ms. Collins, even though that's yet to be decided, but it looks like that she will vote yes. And then Joe Manchin, which is really frustrating as a Democrat. Not surprising, considering that he's taken Republican votes in the past. How will Move On look at this over the coming weeks on November 6th if Manchin is a yes vote? I mean, there's no reason for him to be. He's ahead several points in the latest polls. How much will Move On and some of your coalition members, ask the DNC to withhold funds, that go to him as a member of the Democratic Party? He basically is the only Democrat, and he's not even in trouble. Heidi Heitkamp was in trouble and still is, and she had the cojones to go ahead and vote no. Your thoughts there?
Yeah. So Priorities USA, which is the biggest Democratic super PAC, has already announced that it's not going to back Manchin for re-election this fall. It's also not going to back Phil Bredesen, who's not a senator, but he wants to be the senator from Tennessee, and he just came out and said he would vote for Kavanaugh if he were there. So that cost him their support. We have a much clearer shot at winning the House. We're not taking anything for granted. And so we have this massive program to turn out millions of people to be volunteers, voters, donors, to get House candidates in. On the Senate side, we've actually endorsed a set of champions, people like Sherrod Brown and Tammy Baldwin, who are in states that, could go in either direction, but are nonetheless really sticking to their guns. And then now this week, we just, after Donnelly, who was considered right there with Manchin as a potential vote for Kavanaugh, he came out against. And Move On members chipped in, raised $100,000 for him the next day.
Wow.
So that's not the kind of thing you're going to see us do for Manchin. And frankly, he's going to have a base enthusiasm problem because although he needs a lot of Republican votes to win in West Virginia, he also needs every Democrat to vote for him. And it's going to be hard to pull that. If he votes for Kavanaugh now, it's hard to imagine how Democrats get themselves excited.
We're talking with Ben Wickler here on the Jeff Santos Show as we broadcast here in Somerville, Massachusetts. Ben, take me to the midterms in the sense of where you mentioned a couple of places where you're going to be focused upon in the House. I know California has a number of places, number of congressional seats that Democrats could take back. We just finished talking to our good friend Bernie Porn, a Michigan pollster. There's a couple of seats there. Where do you view on the House side first, and then we'll get back to the Senate, where people should be watching on November 6th?
Up and down the East Coast, everywhere from Florida to New York to New Jersey to Pennsylvania. Then you get to Central Time. There's seats in Illinois. There's seats. I can't remember if Georgia's on Eastern or Central Time. It's on Eastern Time. Okay, Georgia's going to be in the Eastern Bloc. Keep on moving west, and then you get this big mother load in California. I think there's a lot of pickup opportunities. MoveOn is actually endorsed in 106 races. That's more than the last 3 election cycles combined.
Wow.
Some of those are reach. Some of those I think are very much within reach. And the fact is there's going to be a lot of surprises. One of the lessons that I think we're learning in the Trump era is that if you can test everywhere, then you wind up picking up wins in places that you hadn't thought it would be possible.
50-state strategy, right?
Yeah, that's it. And there used to be the strategy of concentrate your fire on just a handful of places that are the top pickup opportunities. But I don't think it actually $1 million race. That doesn't increase your chances of victory that much. But if you have 5 $2 million campaigns, then you wind up winning 2 or 3 of them because the Republican screws up or the Democrat turns out to be a juggernaut. And I think in this election cycle, you're going to see Democrats winning in a lot of places that prognosticators wouldn't have said that they had a chance, including, let me just note, I think we have a real shot in Kansas.
Interesting. That is an interesting place. Of course, get Kovac trying to fix the elections there, so that could be another thing to keep an eye on. Let me talk to you about somebody who's sort of one of the rising stars, and Beto O'Rourke, who's running against Ted Cruz in Texas. How is that looking? And he has got some very positive publicity. Been on a couple of late night talk shows and so forth. How do you view him, and how do you view that race?
That's a race now. I think he's going to help drive the chances for a lot of Democratic House candidates in Texas who might not have had the same wind under their sails otherwise. He's also attracting so much support. People often think that political money is and I guess I just used a metaphor in which political money is a fixed quantity that you can sort of spend here or there. It actually isn't like that. Political money materializes when people are inspired. And when people are not inspired, then it is a fixed quantity. I think what's interesting is that when Ted Cruz gets $1 from National Republicans, it's $1 that probably isn't going somewhere else. But Beto is opening up, people's wallets and credit cards who might never have made a political contribution before because they see the videos of him online. They're inspired by the guy, or they see him speak, like that auditorium of 55,000 people he spoke to the other night. I think it's really exciting. And it really belies this idea that Democrats don't have a deep bench.
Ben, take me a little bit, into where a lot of the meetings that you're involved with in terms of issues, Medicare for all, Bernie Sanders, 4 years of free public university. Where are we in terms of pushing candidates to come out on that? Because what we have seen, we had Wendell Potter on, who, of course, was a whistleblower for Cigna Health Insurance, went after Michael Moore's old movie Sicko, and then became a great whistleblower. He is telling us that there are a number of Democratic incumbents that are signing on, I think 170 now or so, to single-payer health care. But at the same time, they're taking money from the top health insurance companies, Aetna, Cigna, Athema, United. What are you hearing about that, and how concerning is that to you and progressive organizations?
What's interesting is that this is something where the people are leading and the leaders are following. The hunger for a Medicare for all system in which everybody gets health care guaranteed by the government, that has become really a widespread, almost a common coin of the realm for the Democratic base. And it's now something that if you want to run as a Democratic primary challenger to an establishment Democrat, it's something that, of course, is going to be part of your platform and give you a real fighting chance. But at the same time, all these special interests who have shaped political outcomes for generations, they see this as a threat. And so they are trying to make sure that they've got their contributions in and they're shaking the right hands at their fundraisers. I think the question will become, what is the political danger to Dems who don't try to actually move the needle on healthcare? And I was really encouraged that not a single Democrat crossed the line, crossed over the aisle and supported the healthcare repeal last time. But the question is, in the fights to come, my guess is that we'll have votes on things like prescription drug prices, and a series of things like that before we get to the point of having a Medicare for All bill that actually gets through. The question is, will Democrats have the nerve to stand up to these special interests? And I think we'll see the answer to that question, but then we'll see in the 2020 cycle how many people who don't do the right thing lose their primaries, because that is what makes politicians pay attention.
Ben Wickler, thank you so very much. Again, Ben Wickler of MoveOn.org. He's the Washington director, and he joins us from Washington, D.C. Ben, thank you so much for fighting.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. We'll be right back after this timeout. You're watching The Jeff Santos Show.
I got a crick in my neck, limp in my step, cramping in my muscles every time I try to flex. Better than what I'm scared of. It's very sad when the love that I could do was remember you. You know I usually say no, but if you throw me love, I'll throw you some more.
Hey, look, it's those guys.
What's up? What's happening today?
Let's hit those pearly whites, man. Yeah!
The boys, check it out.
Stand up, do my terrorists, don't compare us.
Ooh, cute.
Are you good to drive?
I'm fine.
Hey girl, what's up? What's the name? What's good? What's up?
How many did you have?
I should be fine.
You should be.
Sir, go and step out of the vehicle for me.
Yes, sir. See ya, buddy. Today, Sean's got a hearing. We'll see how it goes. Good luck. So turns out, buzz driving and drunk driving, they're the same thing, and it costs around $10,000. So not worth it.
Well, today's Won't Back Down feature goes to the entire group of people who organized and tried to stop Brett Kavanaugh from becoming a Supreme Court justice. Whether we're talking about our friends at MoveOn.org, whether we're talking NARAL, young people all around this country, people protesting in the Capitol buildings in Washington, D.C. over the past couple of weeks. We thank you for not backing down, and hopefully this is a sign of things to come for America in their local communities, in their local neighborhoods, to get engaged and to not just accept, well, you can't fight City Hall, you can't do anything about it, they got more money and more power. Yes, you can, and we have proven that in the past. I urge all Americans and people from all around the world to keep on fighting and to keep your goals in front of you and to make them happen. Don't back down. We won't back down. I hope you won't either. We're right back after this timeout.
Maybe you can make retirement happen. After all, you made home ownership happen. Homeschooling yourself on loans, beefing up your credit score.
So I'm pre-approved.
You were like, yes! Sorry. Color coding listings, ticking boxes, and flushing every toilet in a 20-mile radius. Home sweet home. You aced house hunting. Now get the tips you need to get on track at aceyourretirement.org.
Patriotism.
It inspires passionate debate, and it's worn like a badge of honor with good reason, because it means love and devotion for one's country. But what really makes up this country of ours? It's the people. To love America is to love all Americans. This year, patriotism shouldn't just be about pride of country. It should be about love, love beyond age, sexuality, disability, race, religion, and other labels. Because love has no labels.
They call me Prince like I'm royalty or something. But the places I've lived ain't no palaces. So I don't need grilled salmon or a new scratching post. Just give me a cardboard box and a can of tuna and we're good. You can even change my name. I'm cool being the kitty formerly known as Prince.
Welcome back. It's the Jeff Santos Show here on Free Speech TV. We have been doing a multiple series of looking at the Midwest in particular and some of the big states that we are going to focus on. We did Wisconsin last week with our great friend Robert Craig of Wisconsin Citizen Action. Today and this week, it's Michigan. And we're going to talk to one of my favorites. He is a regular on the Jeff Santos Show over the past couple of years. He is the president of Epic-MRA Polling. It's great to have Bernie Porn with us. Bernie, welcome to the broadcast.
Glad to be with you, Jeff.
Well, we got lots to talk about. I guess the hottest thing going in Michigan politics is the governor's race, where Miss Whitmer is doing very well, the Democrat, over the lieutenant governor, Mr. Schuette. Give us a little update on what is happening there.
Well, we have Gretchen Whitmer in an 8-point lead over Bill Schuette. Now, there have been previous polls which had a 9 to 13, 14-point lead. That's about 5 different polls. So we are showing probably the closest gap, but this is also following or occurring during the period of this great consternation over the appointment of Mr. Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. And polling in other states have shown that, as well as nationally, has shown that Republicans are getting more energized because of that debate. And so that may have had some impact on our numbers when the survey was done. But she is still leading by a healthy margin over Bill Schuette by 8 points. And when you simulate that, meaning that you take the undecided voters and to the extent that they have a partisan leaning, we apportion them to either side based on their partisan leanings, and then you end up with a 48 to 41% simulation in the race. And that still is a very healthy margin for Gretchen Whitmer. She's getting a solid majority, 80% of Democrats, while Schuette is getting 78% of Republicans, and she's leading by about a dozen points among independent voters. There's still a healthy number of the independents that are undecided that still need to be, I think, communicated with by either candidate, but I think she is in good shape.
Let me ask you two particular issues and or names and how they are affecting the polling in the governor's race and so forth. First of all, Kavanaugh, how much has it hurt Whitmer? If you are talking about, the white working class male vote, obviously Michigan has a big part of it. And of course, Donald Trump utilized that to the upset victory over Secretary Clinton last time around in 2016. How unpopular are Kavanaugh and Trump in the state?
Well, certainly Donald Trump, we've been tracking him in each of our polls, and he has a 55% unfavorable rating.
Wow.
And that's just where we ask about voters, what do you think of him, or do you like him or not? And 55 unfavorable, 40% favorable, but 49% said they have a very unfavorable opinion of him. In terms of his job rating, it's worse. 59% give him a negative job rating, including 43% poor, and 39%, almost the same number as his favorable rating, give him a positive job rating. Only 18% give him an excellent rating. And it's solid in the 80% range among Republicans, and that's why you have, I think, that number is the same in Michigan as it is nationally, and it is why you have such a lack of profiles and courage on the part of Republicans who are not particularly willing to criticize Donald Trump. And that's also why they're following his recommendation very strongly on the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh for U.S. Supreme Court. And we just had the cloture vote, which was won by Trump 51-49. And
as we speak
Collins
today, yes,
is going to be indicating how she's going to vote on the nomination itself. But our guess is that he will probably be confirmed. And with all of the polling that has shown that Republicans are over the past several days much more motivated to vote, for Democrats, it could well be a blessing in disguise that notwithstanding their objections to him being on the Supreme Court, that in terms of the ability to win the U.S. Congress and maybe have a shot at the U.S. Senate, that he be confirmed so that that is removed as a motivational factor for Republican white men.
There are two officials, both Senator Whitehouse and Representative Nadler, who said that they would potentially try to impeach Kavanaugh if he does make it. Is there any discussion of that? And is there any sort of outrage since Trump has such high negatives? Is that something that people in Michigan would like to see, or is it not really coming into play right now?
We haven't asked a question on that, but indeed, as the discussions about the appointment of Kavanaugh proceeded, that was something that I was thinking of that Democrats might want to consider. However, given the ratcheting up of motivation by Republicans, and especially Republican men, I would think that it wouldn't be a bad idea for Democrats to stay quiet on that and not energize the Republican base anymore by talking about impeaching Kavanaugh. I think they should worry about their issues and direct their attention toward Trump. And if in fact, which I think they will, win control of the U.S. House of Representatives, why certainly that House can look more deeply into the details about anything that Kavanaugh may have misstated or lied about in terms of his speech before the Senate,
right?
Or anything else. But I think that they ought to back off a little bit in terms of that, as well as I think impeachment of Trump.
Interesting. We're talking with Bernie Porn, Michigan pollster, president of Epic-MRA, here on the Jeff Santos Show. I want to ask you a little bit about an area where you grew up in Flint. That obviously water crisis, has created a tremendous amount of attention nationally, and of course, it has been the story over the last 4 years. How much of this is hurting Schuette and helping Whitmer, and where do you anticipate this issue at the end of the day being the decisive one for Ms. Whitmer?
Well, the Flint water crisis, that has been a matter of great debate over the past week or two. Schuette is claiming that when Whitmer was prosecuting attorney in Ingham County, that she did not bring the issue to him to have it prosecuted. And she is claiming that in her advertising that Schuette ignored 15 complaints, and it was only after the issue became public that he really pursued it. So that is a real point of contention. And the issue itself had a profound impact on Governor Snyder. When we tested on his favorability and job rating before the Flint water crisis came up, he was just starting to improve after he had supported and signed the right to work legislation in 2013, in December of that year. And he was starting to improve, and for the first time had gotten into a positive job rating during his tenure. And then the Flint water crisis hit. and he just went underwater tremendously. I mean, his negative job rating was at one point in the 60s, 63, 64%, and he has not recovered from it since. And to the extent that Schuette can be labeled with having some responsibility for that, it will indeed hurt him.
Let me ask you, Bernie, has anybody gone to jail in this case involved?
Not yet, but the head of a department that was responsible for making the decision on going with putting pipes into the Flint water system and drawing water from the Flint River, that person is in court right now, and I think that's part of the reason because Schuette got into the process of challenging him. That is why Governor Snyder has not endorsed Schuette. He has refused to endorse him at this point, I think largely because of that lawsuit and the criminal charges against his department head.
We're talking with Bernie Porn, again, the president of Epic-MRA Polling. I'm interested in the fact that you may be able to pick up some seats both in the congressional races in Michigan as well as in the State House. If you can quickly, what should we be watching for on November 6th in terms of Republicans and Democrats taking back some congressional seats in Michigan and also in the State House?
Well, let's talk about Congress first. Alyssa Slotkin is running against Congressman Mike Bishop in the 8th Congressional District. She is a former CIA agent, and she has a very compelling story about how her mother died from pre-existing conditions, died of ovarian cancer, and she is in the ad directly blaming Bishop because of his vote for ending Obamacare, also eliminating pre-existing condition coverage. And so that has been a very compelling issue. And also Chuck Hagel, her boss, when she was, after she served 3 tours in Iraq, working with the CIA to protect soldiers, he is doing an ad on behalf of her. So a very well-known Republican supporting her. And all of the polling that has been done thus far showed that Bishop was in the lead, but one that was done by Stan Greenberg very recently showed that she has a 4-point lead. Nate Silver with 538 has it even up.
Okay.
And it goes back and forth.
Where any other congressional race we should look out for?
The 11th, where the Democrat Allie Stevens is favored by about 4 or 5 points. I think that one is very likely to be picked up by Democrats, and I think the 8th with Alyssa Slotkin is the other possibility. There is also, I think, a possibility of Tim Walberg being in danger in the 7th Congressional District. Gretchen Driscoll is, I think, going to be competitive, but I'm not sure she's going to have enough money to be able to go over the top.
Okay, let's go quickly to the State House. We talked earlier off air about the fact that you could potentially take back the State House or the House of Representatives in the Michigan, in the state of Michigan. Is that possible?
I think that is very possible, and quite often when you get down to the State House of Representatives, you have very little in terms of impact based on the election itself. Your total impact is going to be how the Democratic and Republican base, not only if it's a nationalized issue, but also looking at how the base is impacted by how motivated Democratic and Republican voters are. I think that the sweep, the blue wave, if in fact there is the kind of wave that I think is going to happen, they will be pulled in just by the coattails of Gretchen Whitmer and how Debbie Stabenow does in running for U.S. Senate.
Right, I got 60 seconds. Marijuana is also on there, as is redistricting. Do both of those pass? This is recreational marijuana?
It has 56% support, which is down a few points from where it was at its highest at 61. I think it will end up passing unless younger voters who were measured in the poll do not show up, and then it could be real close and possibly lose.
Do you expect turnout to be up?
The redistricting could very well pass. It was at 48 to 32, 16-point lead, but about 4 out of every 10 of the undecided voters are Democrats, and they're overwhelmingly supportive. They just need to learn more about the proposal.
Bernie Porn, president of Epic-MRA. He, of course, is our man in Michigan, and wish you luck, my friend, except when the Pistons play the Celtics or the Wings play the Bruins.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you, Bernie. Bernie Porn. We'll be right back after this timeout. You're watching Free Speech TV and the Jeff Santos Show.
Because of you, I felt hopeless.
I know it was a joke, but it still hurt me.
Because of you, I felt wanted and not alone in this world.
Because you said hi to me on the first day of school, I felt included, and I knew that I was going to be okay.
I surrender.
All right, pal.
Hey, Dad. Do we have a gun?
What's up?
Do we have a gun?
Why do you ask that, kiddo?
Can I play with it?
No, absolutely not. It's not a toy. You know that. Anyway, I need it to protect you, your sister, and Mom.
But what about the 8 kids who get shot every day by mistake?
Where'd you hear that?
Where do you keep it?
It's hidden.
I bet it's on the top shelf of the closet, under your sweatshirts. Is it loaded? Remember when I found my Christmas gift? You always told me to be curious.
No, that's not what I meant.
And when it's just me and Mom, I could use the gun to protect her.
No, Justin, I promise. I'm always here for you.
But Dad, you're not always here.
Sunshine through today with seasonal temperatures. We should reach our normal high of about 82 degrees by this afternoon. Clear skies tonight with a low near 70.
Bye-bye.
Get home safe.
Hi. Hoping for a crisp breeze to help keep you alert. Oh, he took a sip of water too. That'll probably help. You were probably gonna turn down the radio too, so you could focus, right?
Probably okay isn't okay.
Right?
If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend.
I think the water line is what really drove it home. I blew on him.
Welcome back. It is the Jeff Santos Show that you are watching here on Free Speech TV. We're here every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, repeated at 1 p.m. on the West Coast. And we go to the West Coast and talk to our good friend Mark Taylor Canfield. He is, of course, a great journalist. You see his work in the Capitol Hill newspaper in Seattle. You also watch and look at him and the Daily Coast. And, of course, on the Jeff Santos radio show at Revolution Radio Network every Tuesday at 7:30 Eastern Time. It's great to have Mark Taylor Canfield with us. Mark, welcome to the TV broadcast. How are you?
Hey, good, Jeff. Good to talk to you again. I'm glad to be on Free Speech TV.
It's great to have you. All right, well, let's start with what Seattle has really done on the issue of the minimum wage. First, SeaTac, the incorporated city just south of Seattle, started, 4 years ago with a $15 minimum wage. That has, of course, grown to the city of Seattle and grown across the country. At the same time, Amazon, which is based in Seattle, was not paying its workers in the United States very much, and even worse, overseas. They have now decided to pay their workers, after a lot of pressure from Senator Sanders and others, $15 an hour. So I guess the first question is, what's in the water there that is urging you guys to really help the American people, understand that, this is we cannot have $10 and $8 an hour. We need a livable wage. What's going on there?
Well, yeah, I might be able to attribute some of that to natural artesian spring water, but I think mainly it has to do with sort of a new progressive and also democratic socialist movement that's been happening in this part of the country where we have a city council member, Kshama Swant, who is a member of the Socialist Alternative Party, who has been leading the charge on a lot of these issues, including the $15 an hour minimum wage, which she brought to Seattle and now has spread across the country to cities like San Francisco. And also, she's been on the forefront of issues having to do with affordable housing. Now, we had some pushback from Jeff Bezos and Amazon in Seattle on this issue of taxing corporations that have an annual revenue of more than $20 million per year. There was going to be what they call the head tax. So each employee, there would be a tax on each employee that these large corporations hired. And that money would be used to create affordable housing projects in Seattle because we have mass homelessness here. Both Martin Luther King Jr. County, where Seattle is located, and also the city of Seattle itself have declared civil emergencies due to the vast increase in homelessness in this area, largely due to skyrocketing real estate prices and rents. There is no rent control in Seattle. Rent control is actually prohibited by our own state legislature, believe it or not, in this so-called progressive state. We also don't have an income tax, so there's a real problem with funding our schools. But Kshama Swant has been on the forefront of this, and when Bernie Sanders comes to town, I mean, you know, his talk about the $15 an hour minimum wage definitely helped the movement. He seems to get along quite well with our city council member and also our new freshman member of Congress, Pramila Jayapal. And they are all been largely pushing this campaign for a long time and spokespersons for the $15 minimum wage. So I have to hand it to the people who have not who have not stopped fighting since the beginning. The $15 an hour fight, you'll find a website in every city, I think every major city across the country now, where people are campaigning for that. And the fact that Amazon has decided to go down that road and follow this more progressive, people-oriented, labor-oriented movement, I think is good. I mean, they're obviously not going to lead it because they're a corporation and their bottom line is profits. And we've seen that with Bezos pushing back on the affordable housing tax.
Right. Let me interrupt you.
The council was never able to get that through, by the way, because Bezos and Amazon forced the city council to change their vote at the last minute. So a unanimous vote 1 week, by the next week, turned into a vote against the affordable housing tax.
Yeah, that really shocked me. And is there any repercussions on those who led that? Because to me, it was Amazon, you know, and other companies that really, you know, gave the middle finger to that legislation. Is there any repercussions against them, or was this push by the 15 minimum wage nationally by Amazon, was that at all connected to it?
I really don't know, Jeff. I don't know what the inside story is on that, and I don't have any inside sources in Amazon that could explain that to me. But I do know that there's been a push for affordable housing and for $15 an hour minimum wage in Seattle. And first of all, you asked if there's been any repercussion. Well, I can tell you this: as a member of the community and as a resident of Seattle, I'm embarrassed and sort of ashamed that our own city council, except for Kshama Swant, by the way, that our own city council would rescind its own vote within a couple of weeks just due to corporate pressure. And it wasn't just Amazon; they also got pressure from Howard Schultz and Starbucks and Boeing and a lot of other major corporations. What I was saying about that is that wouldn't it be great if those corporations spent the amount of money that they spend on, you know, pushing their cause and pushing against the affordable housing tax, if they were able to just take that same amount of money and contribute to an affordable housing project like Paul Allen has done recently, where he donated $46 million for a housing project in South Seattle. You know, if they had spent the money that way, I think it would have been much more beneficial to the community. But as far as political pushback, I think there will be. I mean, all of these, the mayor and the city council members will be up for election, and they will have to face the voters on this point. And it's going to be very, very difficult for any of them, except Kshama Swant, to argue that they stood against the corporations for the average working person in Seattle and for poor and homeless people and people of color. I mean, that's just, you know, it's apparent that they were a little bit spineless on this issue. And I'm glad that my friend Nick Licata maybe is not on the council anymore, even though he's been a great progressive leader in this community for a long time, because it would have been embarrassing for him, I think, to see that happen.
All right.
But we'll see.
Let me ask you this, Mark. get limited time in our TV segment here. So I ask you to keep your answers short if you can. Do you feel that there is a wave in the fact that the largest city in the state of Washington, Seattle, has created? Is there going to be any statewide legislation? We talked about Jay Inslee on the radio show being progressive, but are any of the things that have happened in Seattle going to be able to happen statewide?
I don't know. We are looking at how the primaries turned out. It looks like there will be a few more Democratic legislators in our state legislature in November, so that will help turn the tide on some of these issues. But when it comes to the issue of funding education, and our state Supreme Court was fining the legislature $100,000 a day for failing to adequately fund K through 12 education. When it comes to the fact that there's no income tax, that we have the most regressive taxes in the country, there's a 10% sales tax in Seattle. It's terrible, Jeff. It only affects foreign working people. So until we get those changes on the state level, we still have not lived up to our progressive ideals here. And it's going to be a difficult battle, but it's got to be done. I mean, I don't think people are going to just sit back and wait for the change anymore. They want to see it happen now. And that's why the Bernie crap revolution in Washington state has really changed the face of the Democratic Party. So we'll see. We may even have Jay Inslee running for president. I don't know.
Wow. So that would be interesting. One of the people on a national level, your congressperson, Pramila Jayapal, has been one of the leading advocates against Kavanaugh in that fight. Is her star seems to be rising both locally and nationally. Do we anticipate that at one point that she could potentially challenge either Patty Murray or the fellow senator Cantwell? Is that at all something that we could see over the coming years?
I'm not sure about that. I do know that she had some literally large shoes to fill with longtime progressive Jim McDermott, who had been in the Congress for like 14 terms or something. But she's done a great job. She's a true progressive fighter, and everybody knows that about her. Ever since I met her, and she was an immigrants' right activist, shouting on a bullhorn at the INS detention center in Seattle, I knew that she was going to be a fiery fighter for people who are oppressed all over the world. And I think she's proven that. She's definitely a great spokesperson for women and women of color especially. And she's gotten a lot of attention in the U.S. Congress. And being a freshman and getting that much attention is pretty rare. So I think she will be a spearhead in progressive causes. Whether she'll challenge our state senators, I don't know. That's another question. Is Maria Cantwell and Patty Murray are both Democrats who have been in the Senate for many years, and a lot of the Bernie-crats are saying, hey, maybe it's time for some new folks to get in there and, stir things up. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm sure both of them, they're facing challengers in November. Right now, I don't know if the challenge is going to be strong enough to unseat them, though. They have a lot of power in the Democratic Party and in this state. So they're, and people do love their female political representatives in this state. It's just part of our culture. So right now, I think their seats are protected. In the future, I don't know. Because there have been some issues that they haven't been quite as progressive as the Bernie-crats would like in this state.
We're talking with our good friend Mark Taylor Canfield again. You can catch him every Tuesday here on the Jeff Santos radio show, revolutionradionetwork.com. You can listen that way. Of course, he's also a great freelance journalist on all over Twitter, Mark Taylor Canfield. Let me, in our final minutes here, do you sense that we've talked about this on radio, this idea of the Cascadia, if you look at Oregon and Washington State and British Columbia, is this going to be a force on the progressive side of things, maybe the most progressive part of America and Canada and British Columbia? Is this going to be a bigger force than we've ever seen so far, between those three jurisdictions, if you might?
It's a possibility. I mean, the West Coast is coming together in a very progressive political movement, starring some of the folks we mentioned, Pramila Jayapal, Sean Watsamwat, Senator Jeff Murphy from Oregon has also been a powerhouse in the progressive movement. And I think that more and more candidates are going to be coming from the West Coast that will have to be reckoned with. And there's a power base here that is hopefully from our point of view, going to spread across the country and create more progressive areas around the country, because we feel that that's what the future of the country is about. And that's, that is the future, not only of the Democratic Party, but of the state of the union. So we feel like we're trying to set an example up here in the Northwest about what can be done when it comes to things like, a livable wage, and, marriage equity, and all sorts of issues, the legalization of cannabis. All of these issues have been on the forefront of the progressive agenda on the West Coast. And I think California, Oregon, and Washington will continue to lead that, along with British Columbia, by the way, even though, they're not a part of the United States. They've definitely a similar culture going on here. And it's much more progressive than most of the rest of the country. And I only see it becoming more so just as the new candidates come along for office in this area. Most of them are very much on the progressive side of things. They're either Bernie-crats or Democratic socialists, and they're really stirring things up. Sarah Smith is running against Adam Smith, a 21-year incumbent in the Democratic Party, and she's a Democratic socialist within the Democratic Party who's really stirring things up here and saying, we need universal health care for all. So that's, then free college education. Those are two very, very important issues for progressives in Washington state.
Finally, Mark, we've got about 45 seconds here. Do you sense that there is a likelihood that we will see a candidate from the West Coast running for president? Kamala Harris has been mentioned, from Jeff Merkley, as you talked about earlier. This whole progressive left coast Democrats, if you might.
Well, we talked on your radio program about the New Republic article on this issue. And I think, yes, we are likely to see several presidential candidates from the West Coast, because some of them have already made their trips to New Hampshire and other states that are important in the primaries coming up in 2020. So they're already sort of testing the waters to see what the reaction is. And we've also got Howard Schultz, who's the CEO of Starbucks, who keeps floating that balloon, and also Tom Steyer, who's the Silicon Valley billionaire who's been funding this impeach Trump campaign. He also has not ruled out that option. So yes, I think there will be some challengers. We talked about Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington State, has also been mentioned. So yes, I would say yes, definitely.
All right, 30 seconds. We see in your Skype there a guitar. We know that you have been fighting for a number of older clubs that have been potentially shut down. Give us the latest on that. About 30 seconds, Mark.
Oh, well, the Showbox Theater is a venerable old theater, beautiful theater in Seattle, where all the greatest bands have played, and all the greatest bands from around the world, including David Bowie and Prince, and everyone has played there. So we're trying to save it. I'm in the studio now. We're recording a song called Save the Showbox as part of this campaign that, once again, our city council member Shama Swan has sort of been on the forefront of. And the music industry has really come together in Seattle. All the big bands and Pearl Jam and all the independent music clubs and, musicians, Macklemore and Sir Mix-a-Lot, and everybody has been in on this campaign to save the Showbox. There's also another club called the Rebar that my friend Dane owns, which is also under threat of being developed out of existence. And we have the Neptune Theater in the University District, where Gary Newman just performed on Tuesday night, which was a great show. And another theater spot where you can get right in front of the stage and meet your favorite rock star or whatever. So we need to save those places in Seattle. It's part of what makes Seattle such a wonderful place to live, and part of the reason I moved here as a musician.
Well, so fantastic, Mark. We'll keep on fighting on politics, on the music scene. We'll look forward to talking to you on radio and soon again on Free Speech TV. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for watching on Free Speech TV, everyone.
Thank you. Or I'll be right back after this timeout. You are indeed watching Free Speech TV and The Jeff Santos Show.
If you smoked, this new lung cancer screening could save your life. Visit SaveByTheScan.org.
Hey guys, how are you today?
Good.
I'm here to talk about how with technology you can make amazing worlds. Come with me. My team and I bring the Halo world to life.
Is that you?
That is me. I wasn't a math genius, and I knew nothing about coding. But you guys do. You guys have the power to change things.
I want your job.
I want you to have my job.
Well, that's all for today's show. Remember, next week, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Pacific. We'll be back then. We want to thank our guests for today. Ben Wickler of MoveOn.org, Mark Taylor Canfield, great journalist, musician in Seattle, Washington, and of course Bernie Porn, president of Epic-MRA Polling. We thank our great production team here, led by Erica Jones and Adam Stone, and we thank you for watching. We'll be back next week. Until then, this is Jeff Santos. Keep on fighting, and right now, it's my time to say I gotta go.